Today we will cover section 7.7, estimate with percents. First, let's make a basic chart to help us percent estimation problems. So there are several basic fractions that you should memorize the percent and decimal equivalents to. So we have 1/10, 1/8, 1/5, 1/4, 1/3, 1/2, 2/3, and 3/4. 1/10 is 0.1. You just put 1 in the tenths place, and it's 10%. Because you can put as many zeros as you want at the end of a decimal number without changing the value. So 0.1 is equal to 0.10, which is 10%. The first decimal place is the tenths place, the second decimal place is the hundredths place. So since it goes to the hundredths place and percent tells you how many hundredths you have, 0.10 is 10%. Or when converting from a decimal to a percent, move the decimal point 2 places to the right. 1/8 is 0.125, which is 12.5%. 1/5 is equal to 2/10 if you multiply both the top and bottom by 2. And that's 0.2, which is the same thing as 0.20, which is 20%. And then 1/4, 1 divided by 4, if you work that out, that's 0.25, which is 25%. Also, if you multiply 1 and 4, if you multiply 1/4 by 25 over 25, which is the same thing as multiplying by 1, you get 25 hundredths, which is 0.25, which is 25%. 1/3, 1 divided by 3 is 0.3 repeating. So 0.3333 going on forever. And that's 33% approximately. And wait, hold on one second. Or 33 1/3% to be more precise. And 1/2 is 0.5 or 0.50, since putting zeros at the end of decimal numbers do not affect the value. And 0.50 is 50%. 2/3 is 0.6 repeating, 0.66666 going on forever. And that's 66 2/3%, because 66 2/3 is 2/3 of 100%. 3/4, 3 divided by 4 is 0.75. which is 75%. So you should memorize those decimal and percent conversions between those basic fractions at the top of the table. Okay, let's look at an example problem for estimating with percents. We have 48%. Estimate 48% of $5.20. %48 is, if you look at the bottom of the table, at this table here, at the bottom of the table, 48% is the closest to 50% of all those percents at the bottom of the table. And 50% is 1/2. So this is approximately 1/2 of $5.20. Of before a number is a multiplication, so that's 1/2 times $5.20. you can make that over 1 if that helps you. That's the same thing. Multiply the top numbers. 1 times $5.20 is $5.20. Multiply the bottom numbers. 2 times 1 is 2. So as you can see, multiplying by 1/2 is the same thing as dividing by 2. And working that out, 2 goes into 5 2 times. 2 times 2 is 4. Bring down the next digit. 2 goes into 12 6 times. 6 times 2 is 12. 2 goes into 0 0 times. So no remainder. So $2.06 is approximately 48% of $5.20. Estimation is useful if you want to get an answer quickly in your head, hopefully, and you don't need an exact answer, just an answer that's good enough. So like at the store, if you see that something's 48% off and you want to know about how much that is, you can use the methods that we're learning in this lesson. Estimate 73.6% of 106. So I would recommend going back to the beginning of the video, copying the table I made. That'll help you memorize it anyway. If you look at that table, at the bottom row of the table, 73.6% is the closest to 75%, which is 3/4. So let's find 3/4 of 106. Of before numbers of multiplication, so this is 3/4 times 106. We can cancel out 106 on top with 4 on the bottom when multiplying, because each of those can be divided by 2 to get 53 and 2. 3 times 53 is 159. So that's 159 over 2. And then 159 divided by 2, 2 goes into 15 7 times. 7 times 2 is 14. Bring down the 9. 2 goes into 19 9 times. 9 times 2 is 18. 1.0. Bring down the 0. 2 goes into 10 exactly 5 times, so we can stop there. So 79.5. 73.6% of 106 is approximately 79.5. Okay, that was a little bit tricky to do in your head. And a main part of estimation is to be able to do it quickly in your head. So another way we could have approached this problem is we could have rounded 106 to 100. So 3/4 of 100, which is 3/4 times 100. 104 can each be divided by 4 to get 1 and 25, and 3 times 25 is 75. So 3/4 of 100 is 75. Therefore, 73.6% of 106 is approximately 75. Now let's estimate 62.5% of 308. Estimate 62.5% of 308. If you look at the bottom row in the table, 62.5% is the closest to 66 2/3%, which is 2/3. So this is approximately equal to 2/3 times 300. 308 can be rounded to 300. You can cancel out 300 on top with 3 on the bottom when multiplying, because each of those can be divided by 3 to get 1 and 100. And 2 times 100 is 200. So 62.5% of 308 is approximately 200. Now let's look at another example problem. Estimate. Use the benchmark percents 1% and 10%. let's estimate 2% of 81. Using the benchmark percents 1% and 10%. Or 1% or 10%. Okay, let's first find 1% of 81. Or we can round 81 to 80. 1% of 80. Well, 1% of 80. That's 0.01 times 80. Since of before numbers of multiplication, 1% tells you how many hundredths you have, so 1% is 1/100th, so put 1 in the hundredths place. The first decimal place is the tenths place, the second decimal place is the hundredths place. So 1% is 1/100th, which is 0.01. So 1 times 80 is 80. There are 2 decimal places in the multiplication problem, so we need 2 decimal places in the answer. So it's 0.80. Zeros at the end of decimal numbers do not affect the value, so we can get rid of that 0 at the end to make it 0.8. And 2% is 2 times as much as 1%, right? 1% times 2 is 2%. So 2% of 80 is going to be 0.8 times 2. If 1% of 80 is 0.8 and 2% is 2 times as much as 1%, then 2% of 80 is going to be 0.8 times 2. 8 times 2 is 16. There is 1 decimal place total in the multiplication problem, so we need 1 decimal place in the answer. So 2% of 80 is 1.6. So 2% of 81 is approximately 1.6. If you want to find the exact answer, do 0.02 times 81. Next example problem. Estimate, use the benchmark percents 1% and 10%. Let's estimate 15% of 73. Using the benchmark percents 1% and 10%. So let's first figure out what 1% of 73 is. Okay, so 1% of 73, that's 0.01 times 73. 1 times 73 is 73. There are 2 decimal places total in the multiplication problem, so we need 2 decimal places in the answer. So that's 0.73. Oh, actually, let's round 73 to 70. So that would be 0.70. Zeros at the end of decimal numbers do not affect the value. So get rid of that 0 at the end to make it 0.7. And then to find 15%, just multiply by 15. Right? 1% times 15 is 15%. So if 1% of 70 is 0.7, then to find 15% of 70, which is 15 times as much as 1%, you multiply 0.7 times 15. So 0.7 times 15, or 15 times 0.7, 7 times 5 is 35, carry the 3. 7 times 1 is 7 plus 3 is 10. 1 decimal place total in the multiplication problem, so 1 decimal place in the answer. So you get 10.5 is approximately 15% of 73. 71% of 123. We can round 71% to 70%. And let's round 123 to 120. So let's find 70% of 120. We can find 10% of 120, since 10 goes evenly into 70. 10% of 120 is 12. Right? 10% is 0.10. The zeros at the end of decimal numbers do not affect the value, so get rid of that 0 at the end. So that's 0.1 times 120. 1 times 120 is 120. There's 1 decimal place total in the multiplication problem, so we need 1 decimal place in the answer. So that's 12.0, which is 12. So 10% of 120 is 12. Or you can think of 100% of 120 is 120. 100% divided by 10 is 10%. So do 120 divided by 10 to find 10% of 120. All right, so to find 70% of 120, well, 10% times 7 is 70%. So we do 12 times 7 to find 70% of 120. If 10% of 120 is 12 and 70% is 70% is 7 times as much as 10%, then you do 12 times 7 to find 70% of 120. And 12 times 7 is 84. So 70% of 120 is 84. So 71% of 123 is approximately 84. Okay, now let's estimate the rate or percent. Estimate the rate or percent. Estimate 6 is about what percent of 13? 6 is about what percent of 13? All right, so to figure out what percent is equal to the is number divided by the of number in all circumstances. So that's going to be 6 over 13. 13 is pretty close to 12, so that's approximately 6 over 12. The squiggly equal sign means approximately equal to. And 6 and 12 can each be divided by their greatest common factor 6 to get 1 and 2. So we get 1/2, and if you look at the table, that's 50%. Because 50% is half of 100%. So 6 is about 50% of 13. And then we have another example problem. About 77.2% of what number is $15? Let's translate that question into an algebraic equation. 77.2%, if you look at the table, that's close to 75%, which is 3/4. And then of before number is multiplication. Let's use n to represent what number. So of what number would be times n. Is means equals. And then 15. Solve for n. To get rid of a fraction that's multiplying a variable, multiply both sides by the reciprocal of the fraction flipped upside down. So that's 4/3 multiplied on each side. Now we can cancel out 3 on top with 3 on the bottom and 4 on top with 4 on the bottom when multiplying those. We can cancel out 15 on top with 3 on the bottom by dividing each by 3 to get 5 and 1. So that's 20 over 1, which is 20. So n equals 20. 77.2% of about $20 is $15. All right, let's look at using visual benchmarks to estimate the percent of the figure that is shaded. All right, so we can break this triangle up into smaller triangles. So now all the triangles are pretty much equal in size. And there are 16 little triangles total inside the entire figure. 3 of them are shaded. 3/16 is approximately 3/15. Yeah, it's okay if you change the denominator a little bit. That doesn't affect the value of the fraction much as long as the denominator is a relatively large number. But only change the numerator or the denominator if it's a relatively large number and you're not changing it by too much. Otherwise, it's not going to be a good estimate. So 3/15 simplifies to 1/5 if you divide both the top and bottom by 5. And 1/5, if you look at the table, is 20%. Or you can work it out, 1 divided by 5 is 0.2, which is 0.20, which is 20%. And let's do a review problem so that you're prepared to do the spiral review. Write the percent as a decimal. And we have a mixed number percent, 15 1/5%. Just a couple different ways we can do this. Well, 1/5, if we multiply that by 2 over 2, which is the same thing as multiplying by 1 because 2 divided by 2 is 1 and multiplying by 1 does not change the value. So the resulting fraction is going to equal the original fraction 1/5. 1 times 2 is 2, 5 times 2 is 10. 2/10 is 0.2. You just put 2 in the first decimal place, the tenths place. So 15 1/5% is equal to 15.2%. And to convert it from a percent to a decimal, move the decimal point 2 places to the left. So that's 0.152. Another method is to convert it into an improper fraction by multiplying the bottom number and the whole number and adding the top number. So 5 times 15 is 75 plus 1 is 76, so that's 76 over 5. And percent tells you how many hundredths you have, so make it over 100. A fraction line means division, so that's 76 over 5 divided by 100. You can make that over 1. To change it to multiplication, flip the fraction to the right of the division symbol, so that's 1 over 100. Okay, so we can 76 and 100 can each be divided by 4 to get 19 and 25. 19 times 1 is 19, 5 times 25 is 125. And if you work that out, 19 divided by 125, you would get 0.152. And that concludes section 7.7, estimate with percents. Thank you.